in increasing detail, had left her wrung out and exhausted, mentally, emotionally, and physically. She wanted to cry, but if she did, she'd also be embarrassed. Then she'd yell at herself for having any kind of shame for a perfectly justified reaction, and she'd feel even more out of control as she fell into a spiral of logic versus all the feels. There was more. Intellectually, she knew her captors could have done unspeakable things to her. They hadn't, at least not by the time her rescuer had burst through the door to the cabin. But the people who had taken her could have. Her living nightmare could have been 100, 1,000 times more awful. Part of her was relieved. Another part of her felt guilty for being so lucky. She'd gotten a look at the other captives rescued from the same ship. They'd suffered far worse. My father was scheduled to be here, in Hawaii. She clung to the remembered detail from her father's itinerary, something she only knew because he'd mentioned it in passing during a perfunctory phone call. Their monthly chat was a habit started years ago, carried on through undergrad and graduate school, and now maintained as she established her career. It was a fortunate coincidence it had happened right before she'd been taken, and she was thankful. She was fully capable of returning to her apartment in Singapore on her own, but she'd like to at least see him before she tried to go through the process of returning to normal life, whatever that was going to take. It wasn't going to be as simple as getting on the next available flight, and she hadn't yet begun to figure out what she actually needed to do. Her father was the closest family she had, geographically speaking. Her mother was touring Europe, while her father was on business. She wanted to see him, wanted to be held and know he'd been worried for her. A terrible fear lurked in the pit of her stomach, and she tasted bile as she considered the possibility that he'd been too busy to miss her. "He's right here on Oahu," Officer Kokua confirmed with a broad smile. "We reached out to him as your emergency contact. His personal aide has made arrangements for you at the same hotel as your father." She clenched her teeth, but kept her smile frozen in place. Of course. The officer had spoken not to her father, but his aide. Her father hadn't had time to speak to the police, not even after she'd been kidnapped and rescued. A familiar blend of hurt and anger churned in her stomach to mix with her fear. Perhaps she should have made his aide her emergency contact rather than her next of kin, the head and patriarch of her family. Bitterness joined the twisting mess of emotions until she wondered how terrible she could feel in a single moment. Something wet and cold pressed against the back of her hand. She blinked and relaxed her curled fingers. She hadn't realized she'd clenched her hands into fists on her lap. The black nose belonged to a large dog who looked up at her with soulful golden brown eyes. He withdrew and sat beside her, apparently satisfied he had her attention. He was a deep brown all over, almost burnished red, and his long tail brushed the ground once in greeting. Such a somber dog. Recognition blossomed in her chest and spread through her in a cool, soothing wave. She was inordinately happy to see the dog. Her nausea eased as her lips curved into her first smile in forever. She reached out and gingerly patted the side of his neck, then crooked her fingers to scratch the base of one ear as he leaned into her hand. He'd been with her rescuer yesterday. "Hey, Buck." Officer Kokua rose from his seat